Good morning, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for taking time to join us here today at Virtual Fourth Space for a gently moderated conversation between Dr. Paula Wood-Adams, Concordia's Interim Vice President of Research and Graduate Studies, and 6 of our newest Concordia University Research Chairs, who will introduce themselves as the conversation develops. Fourth Space is interested in connecting researchers across disciplines and with varied audiences to foster knowledge sharing while pushing new and challenging ideas forward. And to that end, we are very excited to host conversations such as this one, which allow us to reflect on the values of making one's research public in the pursuit of innovative and collaborative research landscapes. So while we have questions on the ready for the 6 research chairs joining us today, we also invite you to use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen to join in the conversation, and we'll do our best to address your questions. Those of you following along on Facebook, hello, welcome. Feel free to comment there and we'll relay your questions to our panelists here in Zoom. So without further delay, it's now my pleasure to welcome Paula Wood-Adams to get things going. So over to you, Paula.
Thanks, Anna. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our first roundtable. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that Concordia University is on unceded Indigenous lands for which the Kanan Nation is the recognized custodian. I'm very pleased to welcome you to our first ever roundtable with 6 newly appointed Concordia University Research Chairs. This is the first of 2 roundtables. The second, with the remaining 6 new chairs, will take place next Wednesday, September 23rd, also at 11 a.m. The Concordia University Research Chair program, which was created in 2000, plays an important role in deepening our research capacity, as well as in strengthening our training of highly qualified personnel. The Concordia University Research Chairs lead the university's positioning in strategic research areas. We currently have a total of 61 Concordia University Research Chairs at 3 levels: Tier 1, Tier 2, and New Scholar. I'm also really pleased to announce that we are approaching gender parity in our CURC program, which is a direct result of our newly strengthened commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion practices. And that's a personal passion of mine. This roundtable is also a key first component in a research engagement project that is just underway at the university. This project has several goals aimed at enhancing the visibility of the innovative and groundbreaking research being conducted at Concordia. And I'm very pleased that we can take advantage of the virtual Fourth Space platform for this event. The goal is to create an opportunity for our new CURCs to meet each other and create a sense of community. Through sharing their research program objectives, there's also the chance to create potential collaborations. We want to engage and exchange with you, the audience, and let our community, both internal and external, learn more about what a university research chair is. So please feel free to post questions using the Q&A function, as Anna mentioned previously. I'm delighted that we're able to exchange with these leaders in their respective fields and to learn more about what they do. So let's get started. Ashlee, as a CURC, you are the leading researcher in your area at Concordia. What is your vision for the future of your discipline in terms of research and teaching?
Great, thanks, Paula. So I'm Ashlee Howarth, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry at Concordia. And my CURC is in the field of metal organic frameworks, or MOFs. And these are the materials that I make in my research group at Concordia. And you can think of these materials as molecular sponges. So the field of MOF chemistry is quite new, actually, which makes it interesting to answer the question about my vision for the field. So MOF chemistry really started gaining traction in the literature in about 25 years ago. So it's a fairly new field of materials chemistry. And since then, the research has really, or the field has really gained momentum, and it's grown exponentially in terms of the number of researchers, the number of materials discovered, and the potential applications of these materials. And then just 3 years ago, the first commercial applications of metal organic frameworks hit the market. And these are niche commercial applications. But these commercial applications, I think, really demonstrated the potential to commercialize these materials. It really proved to researchers that they have the potential to be commercially viable. And so I think my vision for the future of the field of metal organic framework research is to see these materials being used in widespread applications, particularly those related to issues surrounding our environment and sustainability. So I envision MOFs being used for CO2 capture applications to help mitigate climate change. I envision MOFs to be used for water harvesting and water desalination to help with water scarcity issues. I envision MOFs being used for commercial applications in wastewater treatment, both industrial and municipal wastewater treatment, to help us with our water reuse cycle. I envision MOFs being used for hydrogen storage to drive hydrogen-powered cars. I envision them being used for lots of different applications that will help solve a lot of our current environmental and sustainability issues. And I think that these applications will be driven forward both by contributions from fundamental research and applied research, since we really need to have a deep fundamental understanding of these materials, such as how they are formed, structure property relationships, their stability, things like that. But we also, of course, need the applied research to prove that they can be used for specific applications. So I think the combination of fundamental and applied research in MOF chemistry is going to continue to grow exponentially, and we're going to start to see these materials being used in a lot of different commercial applications.
Thanks, Ashlee. I really like your approach to defining your vision in terms of how it's going to impact the applications of the materials that you develop. Would anybody else like to speak a little bit about their vision for the future of their discipline? Any of the other panelists want to jump in here? Okay, so I'll move on to the next question then, and that's for Chunyan. What drives you to pursue the research that you do?
Hi, thank you, Paula. My name is Chunyun Lai. I'm an assistant professor at the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering. And my CURC is in the area of transportation electrification. So as a researcher, let's say a motivation or my mission is to use my knowledge to resolve some challenge at present. So transportation electrification technology is not a new technology, but it is the main one of the main technology to resolve the challenge of environment degradation. So we know that the transportation contributes to 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emission. So if we could develop this transportation electrification technology, so it makes us to replace the passenger car with all electric vehicles, so we can help to reduce this greenhouse gas emission by let's not say 1/3, so at least half of what present transportation tech contributes to. So with the CURC funding, I would supervise 2 graduate students to conduct research on resolving this challenge. And my research focus on 2 main topics. One is to develop more efficient components for the electric vehicles. So this helps to develop energy saving and longer range electric vehicles. The second is to develop the infrastructure to support the transportation electrification. I have one PhD student who will be working on the energy network modeling and optimization, which eventually will lead to the charging infrastructure design and localization in the cities. So this will, this technology will be integrated into buildings and public facilities for EV charging. So I think this will help to contribute to the transportation electrification technology and help to resolve the environmental issues.
Thank you, Chunyun. Liz, I believe you wanted to talk a little bit about what drives you to do the research that you do as well.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. So my name is Elizabeth Fast, Tanshe Elizabeth Dishna Kaushun. I am Métis from St. Francois Xavier, Manitoba, and I'm now Associate Professor in the Department of Applied Human Sciences at Concordia. And my research chair is in land-based learning and Indigenous pedagogies. And so I guess there's a lot of things that, that motivate me. But really, for me, it's about providing spaces where Indigenous students and community can connect with land-based learning, learning that happens outside of the institution and but is still connected to it. And in some of the programming and research that's been created by and for Indigenous youth through advisory committees and long-term participatory action together, we've been able to create spaces and see just them get so excited about the projects that they've brought to life and the ability to connect with land-based learnings that so many youth, because of disconnections due to colonization and urbanization in the foster care system, haven't necessarily had that opportunity, and it's life-changing for them to be able to engage in that way. And we're growing our programs, and we have a Indigiqueer Two-Spirit subcommittee group that's planning right now their own Indigenous queer only gathering, land-based gathering that Canada Roots Exchange is using as a model to build in provinces across the country. So really exciting time for that kind of work.
Thanks, Liz. I'd like to move on to Chris now. And if you could tell us something, please, something innovative about your research.
Thanks, Paula. So my name's Christopher Bret. I'm a professor in the biology department here at Concordia, and my research chair is in applied cell science. So one of the most, I think, innovative aspects of research on campus is our new Genome Foundry. It's the only one in Canada. It's a multi-million-dollar facility that's meant to start allowing researchers here at Concordia and in Canada to start using methods in synthetic biology to for many applications, from making microorganisms that can manufacture drugs at lower cost, making them more available to everybody in the world, to biofuels, to new sources of food, etc. And so what my lab is doing is we're using this Genome Foundry to start building these new types of drugs. So if many of you hopefully are aware that there's this whole new class of therapeutics called biological drugs, which are basically genetically engineering biological systems to make new therapies. And so I'm a cell biologist, and my lab primarily studies how cells communicate between each other. And of course, every one of us here is a community of trillions of cells, and all of them have to communicate for us to do anything like me talking right here. And part of the communication that they use is something called extracellular vesicles, these tiny little membrane encapsulated packages that send biomolecules from one cell to another so they can communicate and coordinate and allow all sorts of physiology to occur. And so obviously, if we can tap into these things, if we can re-engineer them genetically, we can start to manipulate cell activities, right? And change tissue activities for different types of therapies. So my group is, through this CRC program, is genetically engineering these extracellular vesicles in large scale using our genome foundry. So traditionally, things in this field, in this space, we do things one at a time. We manipulate one gene at a time. We try it out, see if it works. Usually doesn't, actually. But what we're doing is we can now, with this foundry, which is this suite of robotic equipment that basically automates experiments done in our lab, we can do thousands at a time, tens of thousands at a time. And then we can multiplex this, so we can not just do single genes at a time, but up to 8, 10, 12 genes at a time. And so all of this is incredibly complex. It requires things like introducing artificial intelligence, for example, to start mining the data that we get out of these large data sets. And ultimately, what we're doing is we're screening for new applications of these extracellular vesicles. So we genetically manipulate them, we throw them onto human cells in culture, and we're looking for a predicted response in those cells that are of therapeutic value. And so we're thinking of using this technology for delivering all sorts of drugs to cell populations inside these packages, genes, and enzymes for new therapies.
Thanks, Chris. I'm wondering if one of the researchers in the more arts and humanities side would like to address this issue about what is innovative in your research, just to hear about it from a different perspective. Maybe Erin or Liz, would you be able to speak to that? Okay.
I can try. I'm sorry, I'm not holding back. It's just that it's a difficult question, I think, for the speculative side of things. And working as I do between art and philosophy, I think a lot about uselessness, actually. My next book is called For Pragmatics of the Useless, and about the need for processes that don't yet know what they're going to do, that don't yet map on to the exigencies of the current moment. But I suspect that's very close also to what Christopher was talking about, because in order to experiment, you have to have an open enough mind to not be too worried about what you think you already know. So I think in that sense, there's probably a large overlap. But I was also thinking about what Liz was saying and how in order to connect with people around processes and practices, I think perhaps we need to step back a little bit on the question of innovation and move forward on the question of experimentation, which is not in the current vocabulary of the neoliberal university, but I think is really necessary for especially young people coming up and in an environment where they really can't imagine a future. So on innovation.
Thank you, Erin. That was great. I understand Natalie wants to speak to this as well, and then Chunyi afterwards.
Great. I think this has been a really interesting discussion, and Erin said something that I think is crucially important. In this era of innovation, we don't want to lose sight of pure fundamental discovery in our research. I think so many important contributions are made just by funding, in my case, a scientist or a researcher, just to go out and pursue their curiosity and do fundamental research. And I think we can look at all sorts of important discoveries that have happened where the researcher didn't set out to solve a problem or to fix something, but they set out merely to pursue a line of inquiry. And we could even take something like CRISPR, which has been this revolution in gene editing. And as best I understand it, that comes from fundamental work that was done in just looking at the genetics of yeast. And so there's an example of, that isn't a problem anybody set out to fix, but it's led to this incredible discovery and revolution. So I think it's been a really interesting conversation so far.
Thanks, Natalie. Chunyun?
Yeah, I also agree that this is a very interesting and also challenging question about the innovation. Now when we look at the research work in engineering, so we are treating everything in terms of numbers and they all digitalized. But now when I'm looking at my research work, so I'm treating the machine as a human. So we are trying to monitor the health condition of these machines or vehicles or so these mechanical devices. So we are treating these devices or a system as a human being. So we are acting as a doctor trying to monitor the symptoms and diagnose the problem and try to fix issues. So these are interesting. And also we're trying to, I think in almost all engineering disciplines, we are trying to incorporate the artificial intelligence into our research. And even in machines, so we're trying to say, okay, if it's a human is working, running as a vehicle, so it needs to be thinking, okay, there's some problem coming and I need to take this action, take that action. So it comes back to the human actions and decision makings. So I can see a lot of in common among our research, and the innovation, the direction of innovations comes into a common place. It goes back to data and then signal processing and then decision making. So after listening, so that's what I'm thinking. So.
Thank you, Chunyun. Oh, and Chris wants to come back to wrap up.
Well, just to kind of promote discussion, obviously we're all here because we're doing what I think is really innovative research at Concordia, and that's why we were selected as chairs. And so obviously, this is going to be the hot topic, I think, in terms of the questions. Well, everything's interesting, but in response to some of the comments made, I really emphasized application, right? Because I am kind of a knowledge builder. My whole career was based on basically my quest to figure out how cells work. And now I just thought synthetic biology is this amazing opportunity we're finding in the biological sciences to start translating this knowledge that we've been building for years. And so it brings up all these questions in terms of ethics, where now we can do this genetic manipulation to organisms on large scale for all sorts of applications that us humans want. And it also brings up some excellent points, I think, made by Erin first about now as scientists, what our biggest struggle is, we're very we do one thing at a time, we test it, we think about, we do one thing at a time. Now that we have this automated system and these robotics and these genetic methods that we can use, like CRISPR that was brought up, now we're being kind of forced to be a little bit more creative in our thinking, because now we just need a thought and we can let the robotics do it. And what would normally take my lab something like 5 years to do would take, in theory, and this is still being worked out, these robots to do in a month. And so the only thing limiting us in certain respects of what I do in terms of genetically manipulating things to learn more about biology and biological systems, it's just mind-boggling to us, because even the way we train our students and the way I was trained was not to be, pursue all my craziest ideas. It was, filter those, be very hypothesis driven, come up with my best way of approaching a problem. Now we have the opportunity to kind of lose some of those barriers. And I think that's what's really, to me, and I don't want to take all the time here, but this also impacts the questions about training and stuff. The new generation of scientists in this field are going to just, blow us old codgers away, because they're going to have all these opportunities to truly explore creativity. And I think this is where we start to merge ideas, where we can start to, if anything, we have to learn how to be more creative. And I think that's what other people are on the panel here are certainly better at that than me. So I think that's what I want to say.
I always thought that the most exciting thing about research is the creative part of it. So thanks for those comments. I really like that. I'm going to move on to another topic, which I think is also really important. And this question is for Natalie. And Natalie, if you would just introduce yourself at the beginning. You've spoken already, but just so that everybody knows who you are and what you do. And after that, if you can tell us how multidisciplinary collaborations are important in your work, that would be great.
Okay, thanks. So I'm Natalie Phillips. I'm a professor in the Department of Psychology. And I've been awarded a Tier 1 CURC. And I think the official title is Sensory Cognitive Health in Aging and Dementia. So I'm interested in how our senses, which are the input into our brains, and they're how we learn about our environment, how that influences our cognition and our mental health and our physical well-being. So at the crux of it, what I do is multidisciplinary. A lot of the work that I'm doing around the CURC is pivoting around work I do in the Canadian Consortium for Neurodegeneration and Aging, or the CCNA. And we have a team in the CCNA, and my colleagues on that team, so I'm a neuropsychologist. I study the relationship between the brain and cognition as we age. And on my team, I have a vision rehabilitation scientist, an audiologist, an ear, nose, throat surgeon. We've got someone who's a specialist in multisensory processing, speech and language pathology, and gerontology. And so the team itself is multidisciplinary. And then our work touches on, on any given week, I'm interacting with people who are neurologists, geriatricians, nurses, epidemiology. And it's absolutely essential, because if you're looking at complex questions in aging, you simply can't have a single lens on that. So just to give you a quick example, one of the questions that we're pursuing is, why is there a relationship between having a hearing loss and an increased risk for dementia? We know that someone with a hearing loss is at a twofold greater risk for developing dementia. And so there are a number of possible hypotheses for that. One could be that having a hearing loss and developing dementia, they have a common biological mechanism. One could be that if you have a hearing loss, you're getting impoverished information about your sensory world into the brain. And you need to use compensatory brain mechanisms to help deal with that suboptimal situation. And so there's brain reorganization. It could be that you have to divert resources when you're listening to just getting what the basic signal is, and those resources are not being devoted to kind of higher order cognitive processing. Or it could be, as we know, people who suffer from sensory loss also have difficulty maintaining their social networks and remaining socially engaged. So there's greater levels of depression and anxiety, often in individuals who suffer from a significant sensory loss. So just on the face of it, those potential mechanisms we're exploring in two large studies. One is a population study of Canadians, the Canadian Longitudinal Study of Aging. And we're looking at it in Canada's largest study of dementia, where participants are very deeply phenotyped. So those hypotheses that I just outlined, which are the kind of pressing questions in the field, those are ranging from basic biological mechanisms up to social networks and mental health. And so it's impossible not to deal with that from a multidisciplinary perspective. And so it's a really fascinating challenge just to learn to talk to your colleagues and to understand what somebody means when they use their term and when I use my term. but I mean, it's just a terrific opportunity to develop different lenses. And then I think it's an amazing opportunity for our trainees who get exposed to this really wide perspective and to appreciate how different disciplines approach these problems.
Thanks, Natalie. I can see when you speak about that how much you love working with all these different types of researchers and people of different backgrounds. So I can see that's a core part of your research methodology. So thank you for that. Would anybody else like to talk about transdisciplinary or multidisciplinary collaborations? I know that in today's world they are even more important than they used to be. Erin, yes?
Yeah, what wonderful work, Natalie. Lovely to hear about it. On 2 different occasions, I directed the PhD in the humanities at Concordia. So I just wanted to say something about how, in my view, Concordia is such a beautiful place for this kind of multidisciplinary work, that we have these 2 interdisciplinary PhDs that are really working to train the students in areas that overlap across the sciences or the humanities. And what I find that has done for me at Concordia is sort of open up a conversation amongst colleagues where we don't hesitate to speak, even if we don't come from similar environments. And that's the case, I think, between art and science, but it's also the case between art and the social sciences, or between the humanities and the social sciences. So I think that probably, at least my experience of the almost 2 decades at Concordia, is that it's hard to find a non-interdisciplinary person at Concordia. And I think that's really interesting.
Thanks, Erin. I love that. I love that perspective on Concordia, and I really think you have got it right there. Okay, Liz, I'd like to ask you a question now, and if you could introduce yourself at the beginning, or did you already? I can't remember. And if you could tell us a little bit about what kind of training you think is most valuable for graduate students as they navigate the current research landscape.
Sure, thank you. I did introduce myself the first time, so I'll just go right into it. And I think I'm going to pick up also on that last question, because it, to me, is really applicable here too. So I guess just I think for me, it's about opportunity to see research as something maybe that's like to get rid of some misconceptions around what research is or what research can be. And for a lot of the Indigenous students, that means seeing research as full of possibilities and something that they can sort of be in charge of or in community and doing that's not harmful, and that that doesn't take advantage, but rather works to restore and transform and reconnect the things that have been lost through Western forms of education. So getting back onto the land and reclaiming our ways. But one thing that I've done through the research project, like I mentioned, is have a youth advisory committee, and many of the youth that came on as advisors have now come either to Concordia or come into the interdisciplinary program as master's or PhD students, and really have formed a nice cohort. And I think part of that is because they could see, oh, I can do research that spends money on programming to bring us back to the land, like this, really? Or I can be in a course that we get to do basket weaving and build sweat lodges, and this is something that is recognized now by Concordia or by academia more broadly. So we have a new sort of a pilot land-based collective for interdisciplinary students that all happen to be Indigenous, that are working with me and other folks around Concordia. And I think that kind of ability to be in collective, to mutually support one another, is really key also. So getting that support. And I think our Indie program and the School of Graduate Studies has been hugely important in making space and listening to what the students need, and then just opening up those opportunities, as well as providing research and graduate support specifically for Indigenous students. So there's been so many changes that have been happening that have been really key in getting the students excited to come do research in ways that are valuable to them and highlight the strengths of Indigenous knowledge systems in their communities. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Liz. I'm so happy to hear about that experience. That's really been something that we've wanted to achieve, and to hear you say that this is beginning to happen. I'm really, really happy. Would anybody else like to talk about this issue of training graduate students? I know it's one of the key things for researchers, because it's how we do our researches in collaboration with students. So would anybody else like to speak to this topic? Chunyun?
I think regarding graduate student training, as I'm also new here, so I just graduated not long ago from my PhD. So I know like during the graduate studies, you need to keep being motivated, and then you need to have a very clear objective or career plan in order like to keep focused on what you wanted to do from the beginning. Like for me, as a new faculty member, so as a supervisor, so I would prefer like even from the beginning, before I meet the students, so I will need to be clear about their career plan, and then to see if I really have the facility and the like everything needed to train the students. So like I'm trying to be very careful in selecting the students at the beginning. And once the student is getting to Concordia and into my research program, so I need to support the student as much as I can. So because this student is coming here to achieve the career goal or career objective at the end. So I think that's very important. The other is that like, when we are training the students, that they have to become an independent researcher. So in my program, like I try to create just the environment for them to become like independent. So I provide as much as less supervision as possible at the first year, but I will need to like kind of let it go like for the later on stage, and also create a small like group environments that later senior students can take on the new students, and they become like independent researcher. I think this is very important, especially in engineering. Like no matter they become an engineer at the end, or they go on with the academic career, so they have to be the one they making decisions themselves. Because I'm a new faculty member, I know how hard it is that when you don't get enough training during the PhD stage, and then it's very difficult to move on in your future career. But I think I would like to thank my former supervisor, who really gave me a lot of opportunities, like in contact of so many industries, and then to lead so many projects. So I would carry on this kind of supervision and training to my students.
Thank you, Chunyun. I know so many of us train our students in a similar way to how we were trained, especially if we had a very good experience like you did. And I also wanted to mention that handoff point where, you know, you step back and your student becomes the leader. And for me as an engineering researcher, that's been one of the, I always find that to be the most exciting point when I can say they're the expert and I'm not. I think that's so wonderful to see that. Ashlee, I know you had a comment on this, and then afterwards we'll come to Chris. And Ashlee, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about the new facilities that you have, that would be wonderful.
Absolutely, yeah. So first of all, it's really great to hear everybody's perspectives on research and innovation and fundamental research. And I think it's interesting how a lot of our opinions on those things kind of align, even though we come from very different fields. So it's cool. But yeah, in terms of student training, I mean, I think the term interdisciplinary has come up a lot during this discussion, and I think that's a really important aspect of student training. And what's really nice about the interdisciplinary training at Concordia and now in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry at Concordia is that we have a new applied science hub. And the hub is designed in such a way to actually promote interdisciplinary collaboration and interdisciplinary training. So we have big open concept research labs that are shared by multiple researchers in different fields. We have organic chemists, inorganic chemists, materials chemists, people working on nanomaterials. Just the floor below us, we have chemical and materials engineers. And then on the first floor of the new Science Hub, we also have District 3, which is a startup incubator, which can help mentor students and faculty in entrepreneurship and starting up companies based along their research. So what I think this kind of helps to encourage interdisciplinary collaboration and interdisciplinary training. So now students have easy access to equipment that belongs to all different researchers or in shared facilities. And we also have access to District 3, so we have access to students who are interested in entrepreneurship can join a mentorship program there. And just again, to speak to kind of the student training aspect of things, I also think what's really important in the sciences, we often think a lot about kind of the hands-on training and the specific research training, but I think what's also really important is training in scientific communication and public outreach and engagement. And I think Concordia also does a really great job of kind of promoting that and encouraging that and allowing our students to get that sort of training as well.
Thanks, Ashlee. So Chris, do you want to add a few comments there?
Yeah, I'll just build on what Ashlee said. I think Concordia has a lot of great programs. Obviously, chemistry is building theirs now with the new Applied Science Hub. And going back on our program on synthetic biology, Concordia has the only nationally funded training program in this space that incorporates people in engineering. And as well, obviously, it's genetic engineering and re-engineering biological systems is what synthetic biology is. So we've got a lot of people in engineering that are working with us and taking students in the programs or are co-supervised with people in biology. And these students who are enrolled in this program called the NSERC SynBio Apps program also have, part of the program is they need to get experience in industry. And so we partnered with companies where they can go and have a brief internship to see, get a feel for what a job would be like, where in the future, in terms of applying what they're learning in the program, and also to network with companies and to understand more the entrepreneurial aspects of research and how they can maybe spin off their own ideas and their own, whatever whatever they create in our labs. They have the opportunity to write, not only stay in academia, not only go into medicine, which is what a lot of my students do now, or into dentistry and other programs like that. But now to start to become leaders in Quebec, in Canada, in this emerging space of synthetic biology that will, we think, have a big impact on, like I said, many different things, including biofuels and things like that. So I just wanted to add that, there's a lot of good programs at Concordia that are kind of unique in Canada and very strong and very interdisciplinary with many opportunities for students to become, leaders in these areas.
Oops, sorry about that. Thank you, Chris. Erin, I was wondering, I know that you are an expert in the training of research creation. I was wondering if you would be willing to say a few words about that, because it's really a very different approach, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, there's an overlap here with things that Liz said about what else knowledge can look like. And so when I started at Concordia, we were just beginning to imagine doctorates in research creation. There had been a few that had sort of made their way through what was then called Sept and is now called Indi. But I came to Concordia as a practicing artist who had a PhD in philosophy and political theory, and it just never occurred to me that we couldn't do PhDs in research creation. So it sort of grew in that direction with a number of hires that sort of didn't ask whether it wasn't possible. And one of the great things about Concordia is that when that happens, people sort of jump on and sort of puzzled, try to figure out, wow, you know, our evaluatory committees have to change. We have to get people here who are practicing artists but don't necessarily have PhDs and so on. And so I say it that way because I think it's really been student-led, how we understand training and research in research creation. We've allowed the students to develop their own orientations to questions of methods and field work, and have followed them in their own ways of understanding rigor. And I think that that has caused anguish, concern, evaluatory committees that didn't know how to recognize value. And I think a lot of that has been really bolstered by our Indigenous colleagues, our Black colleagues, who have pushed us to think hard about opening ourselves to what we don't know how to value, because it's been devalued by academia over you know, hundreds of years. So what I would say about research creation is that it's perhaps a little bit opposite from the idea of career. That what we do in research creation is try to honor the work as it emerges in a real sense of not understanding it yet, and creating the environment to foster those modes of knowledge, and then to believe that the world recognizes modes of knowledge as they come into being, and then knows what to do with them. And I think the other thing I would say is that, you know, people don't generally go to university in fine arts to become professors. I mean, it can happen, and some of us do, but I think it is a different trajectory. And so it's not so much for me about assuming that the person who's come to me to do a research creation PhD wants to return and maintain their relationship to the university, but more so that they've sort of reached a moment mid-career where they have some really urgent research questions that they want to spend time engaging. And so when I was new at Concordia, often my students were older than me. Now they're, you know, more or less my age. And so I'm really dealing with colleagues a lot of the time.
Thank you, Erin. That was great. Natalie, did you want to add to this discussion?
Yeah, it's been terrific so far. So, you know, just a point that our job is really not to create trainees in our own likeness. And I think to really, again, understand their career or their life trajectory goals is huge. And you know, just speaking from a science perspective, you know, we're all aware of how precious and few jobs in academia are. So I think this idea of preparing trainees for any one of a number of career paths is something we really have to take seriously, because you know, I don't think I'd be doing a great job as a research mentor in solely preparing somebody for a research career in academia. The world's much more, much more diverse than that.
Thanks, Natalie. Okay, I have one more question that I'd like to bring up. And this one is going to be for Erin. Erin, I'm not sure you introduced yourself fully yet. So if you can take the opportunity to do that. And then if you can tell us about what is your view on the value of public engagement with respect to research?
Thank you, Paula. It's been very interesting listening to everyone. I'm Erin Manning. I'm a professor in studio art and film studies, and I work across art, philosophy, and the political. A couple of decades ago almost, I started Sense Lab at Concordia, which is a laboratory, I call it a laboratory for thinking in motion, which is probably as vague as you can get, but it's really been an environment for experimentation, and perhaps a way to describe it is that we incubate processes of collaboration that are seeded from really anywhere that is interested. So there's no membership to Sense Lab. You can enter and leave as you want. We have probably about 800 people that are active across Australia and Europe and North America. But to be active is not to feed back into Montreal, but to grow something wherever you are. So a lot of our work is just sustaining. An example of that would be a collective in the US called the Design Studio for Social Intervention, who are amazing African-American activists. And what we've done with the Design Studio is, for the last 15 years, is offer them a residency for relaxing, because Montreal is much more relaxing than Boston, where they do real hands-on work with often in areas of Boston with a lot of violence. And so our work has never been to necessarily push ourselves into an environment, but rather to think about how we can give people the conditions to best do the work they need to do. Over this period, one of our areas of commitment has been neurodiversity. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about neurodiversity in relation to this question of the public. It started out with autistics contacting me around, I think it was around 2010, and recognizing allegiances in things that I was working on, writing about, and the work that Sense Lab was doing. And we became really committed to neurodiversity, particularly these people who'd contacted me were non-speaking autistics who type to communicate. And at that point, I started opening up my classes to neurodiverse folks who are still excluded from education. And there's no inclusion in Canada at any level of mainstream education for non-speaking autistics. And so I started Skyping them into my classes. Some of them were very young at the time. I've had 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds in my PhD classes. I've taught classes on Skype for years in the evenings. We've had people come to Concordia. We've published their books at Duke University Press and at Puncton Books and at Open Humanities Press. And then, as it happens over that period, more and more students have come out as neurodiverse. And this should be a surprise to nobody that folks end up passing over years, but are very uneasy in a system of education that promotes neurotypicality, that promotes forms of attention and expression, which are very language centered. And so I say all of this because our work has been really committed to other kinds of ways of understanding research. I no longer require speaking in my classroom. I no longer require writing. I really want to, if possible, send people to places where they need to do the work. So if I get a student who, is a middle-class white woman I can't help. I want to be able to send them to an environment where they can do their work better. So to those ends, over the past years, I've co-taught with Black colleagues. I've invited Indigenous colleagues to help us think through what philosophy could be from an Indigenous perspective, through modes of knowing which have nothing to do with the many books that I studied as a philosopher. And we're working towards something we call the Three Ecologies Institute. And so I'll just say very quickly, Felix Guattari, who is a hero of mine, a therapist and a philosopher and an activist, talked about the social, the environmental, and the conceptual as the three ecologies. And we've been working toward honoring the overlap of those ecologies, really studying as much as we can our Indigenous colleagues' work, because I think that they know everything about the three ecologies, and facilitating environments in the city, so that the public is no longer something that we understand as different from the institutional. And to those ends, thinking about the para-institutional, an example of that would be the work that we've done over the last years on supporting a Jamaican Canadian restaurant, recognizing that if we want to connect with our Black colleagues, that we may not want to do it always on the grounds of the university, that there are other ways of fostering environments where communities move, and that our work there, I mean, what Sense Lab has done there is paint the walls, do the dishes. I mean, it's not front-facing work. And that's why I was saying earlier that I think the question of innovation is complicated, because if Sense Lab works well, you never see us. I mean, the work is really in the background, and it's about a kind of humility, I think, and often comes very close to burnout. And so the work that we do as well is trying to support ourselves. And so I just wanted to recognize that this work has been very hard with COVID. With neurodiversity, we have a lot of people with mental health issues, myself included. And the social isolation has been difficult. The people we work with are precarious and often in communities that are endangered. And the Sense Lab space at Concordia is closed. And I had underestimated, actually, the value of that space. Sometimes it had been a hard space to manage at Concordia, because it's a very odd space for anybody who's ever been there. And I sometimes thought, oh, maybe it does nothing, but I'm realizing that it got a lot of people out of bed. And so people have been talking about how hard it is, particularly very young researchers and artists and people who are not in the university formally, because Sense Lab has always had as many people who are not formally in the university as are formally there, who could take refuge there. And so that's been really difficult.
Thanks so much, Erin. I really appreciate that that perspective, and I really like how your research involves everybody and not just academics. That's fantastic. I think we're getting just about to the end of our time. Anna, I'm wondering, should I hand it over to you at this point?
You certainly can. Erin, there is a question in the Q&A for you if you want to open that up, and feel free to type in an answer at this point as we are closing up and people are leaving us. But I did want to say a few words of thanks, really, on behalf of all of us behind the scenes here at ForSpace. Thank you all for being here, for sharing your expertise, for participating in the discussion. A very special thank you to our collaborators in the Office of Vice President, Research and Graduate Studies, and of course, you know, the panelists, for your insights and for the time shared here today, and our audience as well. Thanks for being here. A recording of today's presentation will be available on our website, which is concordia.ca/4. And of course, it's already on Facebook now. So those of you on social media, If you're into that, we invite you to follow us at CU4Space to keep up with the multitude of workshops and in-depth discussions and interdisciplinary conversations that we are producing pretty much on a weekly basis. On that note, I will wish you bon appetit, I guess, and I will invite you back here on September 23rd for part 2 of this conversation. And I see that Erin just wanted to say something else.
Yeah, just quickly, because we had a question about how to get involved with SenseLab. If you go to senselab.ca, there's a contact button, which goes to my email, and I'll get back to you if you do that. So senselab.ca.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Erin. And thanks again, everybody. And we'll see you next week. Much appreciated. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.